whoever was tied to that stake would now begin feeling the absolute agony of the skin coming away from their lower legs, working its way up their thighs and the lower parts of their body.
Their injuries will get progressively more serious the longer this exposure lasts. Burns are rated from 1st to 3rd degree.
A 1st degree burn involves literally just heating of the epidermis, and all you see is redness of the skin. A 2nd degree burn is one stage of pain more, because there you see the epidermal layer, or the most superficial layer, stripped from underneath and blisters forming. And those blisters can be acutely painful because of the stretching of the overlying skin by the blister. The 3rd degree burn is a full thickness burn, so it involves not only the epidermal layer, but it also involves the dermal layer.
Past this point, the skin is dead and the fat, muscle and organs underneath are being destroyed. The victim is still alive and conscious, whilst their lower body is being burnt away. This suffering lasts only a few more minutes until the flames reach the face.
They will have inhaled flame, and the same as with stake number 1, they're going to have burns to the inside of the windpipe, which is quickly going to bring about their death.
So after 5 minutes, 2 of the victims would have died from inhaling flame. It takes another 10 minutes for the person in the ring of fire to die due to 3rd degree burns to the whole of the body.
The temperature at that fire has been about 140 Fahrenheit for a number of minutes now, and the person there would have been suffering massive burns to the whole of the body because the fire is all around them. The flames hasn't actually touched them, but it's the intense heat from the fire that would have brought about huge burns.
After 15 minutes, all of the victims would have died, but the causes of death varied.
We know that in stakes 1 and 2, the fire would attack the people tied to that stake by flame inhalation, whereas on the 3rd stake, it's the radiated heat that would have caused the death.
So modern analysis has shown what really caused people to die on the stake. This discovery can shed new light on the death of the Reverend John Hooper. Historical documents depict him burning on a stake, surrounded at its base with firewood. If this is accurate, then he would first have suffered serious burns to the legs, followed minutes later by injury to the windpipe brought on by flame inhalation. And the Reverend John Hooper would have died from drowning as his lungs filled up with fluid. Perhaps the most gruesome form of torture in history was specifically designed to prolong suffering. Its creator ruled over medieval Transylvania, where he was given the nickname Devil. His real name was Vlad Dracula. Impalement has been used for at least 3,000 years, but one man took this method of torture to a terrifying extreme. Vlad Dracula, also known as Vlad the Impaler.
The reason that we remember Vlad is because he was a man of quite exceptional cruelty.
His legendary bloodlust inspired the Count Dracula myth.
Future generations would associate him with the undead, with vampirism, but the original Dracula was even more terrifying than anything that could be created by Bram Stoker or Hollywood or anyone else.
Vlad Dracula impaled his victims in the most terrifying way ever seen.
Vlad's favorite method of impalement was horrific. He did it vertically, inserting the stake through the rectum so that it went right up through the core of the body to emerge through the mouth. What is most horrific is the fact that it took so long for people to die. That the stake was arranged just so through the body so that death would not come quickly. It is torture for its own sake.
Historical accounts describe victims surviving fully impaled for hours or even days. Experts have dismissed these stories as folklore. But can modern science show that it's actually possible to impale a human body through its very core in such a precise way that the victim could survive for up to 2 days? Criminologist and historian Marian Troe is traveling to the heart of modern-day Romania to discover the real Dracula. 500 years after his death.
Vlad Dracula was one of several rulers of Wallachia in the Middle Ages, the country today we call Romania. The Middle Ages was a vicious time when cruelty was acceptable, but the legend of Vlad is that he went beyond that. This is almost certainly the kind of stake that Vlad the Impaler would have used. It's made from pine, and Wallachia is full of pine forests. And he had in his army a team of men who were called amlas, and their job was to look out for straight timbers like this in a forest. They would then cut the tree down, and they would sharpen that end. That's the end that goes into the ground, and I think 4 men would be able to do that job very, very quickly indeed, in minutes. And this end, therefore, is the end that will be inserted into a human body.
But could Vlad really have devised a way to make his victims survive for hours or even days on the stake? Trauma surgeon Dr. Mike Edwards and three-dimensional graphics designer James Dean are investigating this seemingly impossible claim.
If a stake is travelling through the pelvis and abdomen into the chest, all these areas are very richly supplied with blood vessels and nerves and organs. The chances of one of these vital structures being hit are exceedingly high.
If the major blood vessels or organs are damaged, death will be rapid.
People probably wouldn't be able to live more than a few minutes.
James and Mike will impale a computer-generated body to discover whether there is a path from rectum to mouth that can avoid these delicate structures. If such a route exists, then it is possible that Vlad could also have discovered it, and thus devised a method of impaling that prolonged death.
We're using a 3D model of a person. We can have a look at bones, we can see the organs, we can see the blood vessels, and we can manipulate that in 3D and see if we can find a route to get a stake to go through it.
So this is the stake here.
If you insert it to this level here, which is about the level of the 5th lumbar vertebrae,
So up to about here.
Now there's the point. We're in the danger area here.
The stake is advancing through the pelvis. If it damages either of the major blood vessels, the vena cava or aorta, the victim would die from internal bleeding within minutes.
Now if you advance the stake a little bit further, the stake is coming up behind the bladder, but in front of the main blood vessels. Now, if when, say, Vlad was experimenting with this, he found that people were dying very quickly, he perhaps might decide to alter the angulation to try and avoid those vessels. We've avoided the main blood vessels.
So the person will be suffering no life-threatening injuries at this point, but the stake must proceed next through the bowel.
Now it's perforated through there. I think it's got to perforate. Okay. There's no way that it could travel all the way up here and all around there.
It would seem impossible to impale someone in this way without puncturing the bowel, an injury that releases a flood of bacteria into the body cavity, leading to infection and death within 2 days.
It must have been absolutely astonishing amount of pain, and the sort of mind that would want to inflict this, you just can't imagine, can you?
Vlad grew up in a violent world. Wallachia was at war with the Turks, and Dracula had been a child prisoner.
Dracula was a prisoner of the Turks from the age of 12, and he learnt cruelty at their hands. Because of the way of life at the Turkish court, he may well have been sexually assaulted. This, he saw, was a means of revenge. He could use the notion of that sexual assault, and he could twist it in his own mind into impalement. And it coloured the whole of the rest of Dracula's life.
The victim has been skewered through half of his body, but amazingly would still be alive. He can breathe, and blood still pumps around the body, the two systems vital to sustain life. Now Mike and James must navigate past the heart and lungs.
If this stake went a little bit backwards and through the heart, then death would be within minutes, very quickly. I think we need to maximise this space between the heart and the back of the sternum, because then that will allow our stake to travel up and push the heart backwards rather than perforate it.
The sternum or breastbone would deflect the stake back into the body.
Scraping up the inside of the sternum, we haven't perforated the lungs, and although obviously it must be presenting problems with breathing, I would say breathing would be very difficult and very laboured. Let's just advance the stake, shall we? And let's see how much it impinges the windpipe. It's my impression that probably they would be feeling, if they were still alive, they would be feeling this coming through, and the natural reaction would be to pull the head backwards to allow this thing to come up. Now it's going on up and up and up, and let's put it right the way through now. In order to survive, the airway must be clear.
Yep.
And I think, at this point where it's coming through the neck, that is not compatible with life, because you no longer have an airway.
At first inspection, it seems impossible to impale someone and keep them alive for days. Death would occur due to suffocation. But James has an idea.
Thinking about it, it could be, the taper on it could be much longer, in which case the bit that's coming through the neck and mouth could actually be quite a lot thinner.
If the taper on the end of the stake was narrower, it would not block the victim's windpipe and prevent breathing. If this is possible, the ancient accounts might actually be correct. While James and Mike continue to investigate, Merian is at the scene of Vlad's most gruesome victory. This was in 1462, when Vlad led Wallachia in a war against the Turks.
His army was only a third of the size of that of the Turks. They were well-trained, well-disciplined, well-organized, and Vlad's army was none of those things. All he has left is shock tactics. And here, in a field, he impaled, according to some accounts, up to 20,000 people. Some of them would have been captured Turks, but most of them were his own people. They were men, they were women, they were children. When the Turks saw that, they stopped in their tracks. Mehmed II, their leader, was astonished and appalled. According to some accounts, he turned his horse around and rode back, and his army followed. The field of the impaled has got to be the most dramatic and dynamic use of torture for intimidation the world has ever seen.
Vlad was responsible for this terrible massacre. But could this horror have been made even worse? Could Vlad have acted to keep those 20,000 people alive on the stakes? When the stake came through the mouth, it was too wide and would have suffocated the victim within a few minutes. James is thinning the taper on the stake in an attempt to open the airway and therefore slow death.
We can see straight away there that the airway is not compromised that much. They're potentially still alive.
So this is potentially how Vlad did it, I think. I think we might have made a discovery here. I think it's entirely possible that he might have been able to.
I think so. When you present it this way, you can see it as a clear passageway, can't you? From the rectum right the way through to the top of the neck. So I think we have to take those contemporary texts fairly seriously now.
Yeah, I would agree.
Vlad put thousands of people to death by impaling them. With this number of executions, it's easy to imagine how he might have experimented with different stake shapes and sizes and different methods to finally develop the most drawn-out and agonizing procedure possible.
I was initially unsure as to whether this could have been done. Even when I saw it on 3D reconstruction, I could hardly believe it, but now I think I believe it.
Amazingly, the myths surrounding Vlad's extraordinary cruelty could be true. The thousands of men, women and children that Dracula killed could have taken up to 2 days to die while fully impaled on a stake.